The Empathy Table is an Ideos podcast. We believe empathy can shape and influence the ideas for solving some of our world's greatest challenges. Both ideas and empathy begin with a story, and stories are often shared around a table. Pull up a chair. Welcome to the table. Welcome back for another episode of Food for Thought, a special edition of the Empathy Table, a forum and video podcast that brings together Christian leaders, experts, and practitioners for the sharing of stories and ideas for solving some of our world's most challenging and polarizing issues. I am the Empathy Table producer, Alyssa Tan. Joining me today are three thoughtful young women, all in the start or very early stages of their careers. We will be discussing the particular challenges and opportunities facing Generation Z as we participate in co-creation after the pandemic. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll enjoy this episode of the Empathy Table Forum. Joining us today, we have Mickaela Ramos. Mickaela Ramos is a senior political science major specializing in foreign policy and international relations at Biola University. This past year, she worked as the affinity group coordinator for the Department of Student Enrichment and Intercultural Development under the Division of Diversity and Inclusion at Biola. Good morning, Mickaela. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. All right, our next guest is Brooke Vines. Brooke has just completed the first year of her master's program in bioethics at Loyola Marymount University. She received a neuroscience degree with a minor in psychology from the University of Tennessee, where she also played softball and developed a drive to work in healthcare. Her current interest is to work in patient advocacy, ensuring the autonomy and voices of patients. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. And then we have April Chen. April is the founder of Gentle. Gentle began by making empathy cards and then grew into a community dedicated to the mission of gentleness. She was born in Chicago, raised in Hong Kong, and went to Babson College for entrepreneurship. She loves doing anything creative and has recently joined the Ideos team as an External Affairs Fellow. Hi, April. It's good to have you with us today.
It's good to be here.
All right. Well, let's kick it off. So we're all in a highly formational time of life as members of the Gen Z generation, and it's safe to say that as much as this pandemic has changed our society, it will likely have a much more long-term impact on our generation. So, and April, if you could kick us off with this question, how has the pandemic either revealed or changed the way you see the world around you?
I think it's definitely changed the way, I think one aspect that it has changed for me is that it's made the world seem smaller. I've personally never had more people reaching out to me and checking in if I was doing okay. And I experienced a lot of small acts of care and kindness. I'm not sure about everyone, but that's my experience. And so I feel like because I've been in the mental health space for a while, I've always known in that context, it's important to show empathy and kindness because we never know what people are going through and how people are experiencing certain types of suffering. But I think because of COVID-19, that reality is now amplified. We know that the probability or possibility of someone experiencing grief or loss or certain types of difficulties is more and more possible. That's why treating each other with gentleness is really important right now. And I think I've seen a lot of examples of hatred and anger and people lashing out. But I've also witnessed a lot of people choosing to respond in another way and choosing to make the most out of beautiful life moments and choosing to be resilient. And so I think with that, I'm reminded of human creativity, human kindness. And yeah, so that's how I've kind of how I've seen the world change, but that's just my one small perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Brooke, what has been changing or what have you been learning in this time?
Yeah, so for myself, I'm working a bit in healthcare right now, helping out with some different corporations and policy making. And I think one area that I have seen change or that I think needs growth is especially in the healthcare system. I think this time, especially in coronavirus, has shown the cracks within our healthcare system. And although that seems like a negative, I think it's a positive in that it allows us to grow. I think here in the United States, we're quick to say that, things they're great. They don't need as much improvement as in other places. But I think it's definitely encouraging to be able to help grow our healthcare system and, really help do what healthcare seeks to do, which is to do good for our patients. So I think it's a good time for growth.
Yeah, thank you. Mickaela, what about you?
I think, so I echo everything that has been said already. I think from my perspective, I see that, I think something that has been revealed to me, but is something that's continually going on, is the fact that a lot of our public health depends on each other. So for example, the reason that we wear masks, even if, we're not experiencing any symptoms of the disease, or if we're, even if we're not experiencing those things ourselves, we wear masks in order to protect other people. And I think that simple act of wearing a mask speaks more to our desire to see community health rather than individual health. Or obviously, both of those are important, but I think just in the midst of the pandemic specifically, as it's affecting all of us, I think you're seeing what I think is really interesting is that there are simple things that we can do that speak volumes and really show that, me wearing a mask is not just me protecting myself or protecting you. It's because I want this larger scope of health for us all.
Yeah. All your responses are reminding me that something I've been learning is how holistic we are and how we often don't care for whole people. But April, you were saying we need gentleness right now, and there's a mental health and mental well-being aspect to us, and we have a physical well-being that we need to care for, and also a communal well-being, and all those things are so clear right now when things are chaotic and dangerous almost, and there's a lot of fear running around. Yeah. So a lot of people have been commenting and including some of our previous guests on the empathy table from Praxis. They've been talking about the dual realities of pain and suffering juxtaposed with hope and optimism. So what are the greatest pain points and the most hopeful horizons you all see in the middle of this?
That's a really good question. I think that there is a lot of pain and there is a lot of injustices. And I don't think, when I consider this question, I don't think I can speak to the greatest one. But I think for me, the pain points that I think have been brought out myself and how I see other people too, is this sense of loss and not knowing how to deal with loss and not knowing how to process through that. So that can be the death in a metaphorical sense, but obviously also the reality that people are dying and people have lost their loved ones in this and are losing. And so I think that that pain of not knowing how to navigate that and not knowing how to sit with our emotions, one thing that I see, and I don't want to run past it. I think a lot of even for me, I kind of experienced my first time kind of going through that roller coaster of grief was around 4 years ago, and I just didn't know how to, and I didn't know how to be patient and kind with myself in that, and I didn't know how to deal with pain properly. So I just feel you mentioned Praxis, and they do a really wonderful job, even in their writings, leading us in, I've read a lot of what they put out there, leading us in grief and lament in the season, and they also do unpack what hope is and the beauty of hope that we have right now, even in the losses and the deaths. And the hope is I think for me personally, like the promise that, God is with us in it, and the promise that there is eternity when we realize how fragile like our life is and how fragile like humanity is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mickaela, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that one of the greatest pain points for me specifically as an Asian American woman has just been seeing a lot of the rampant hate and xenophobia against people, who look like me and identify as Asian. I think my family's immigration story coming here to the States from the Philippines has been one that's, desired a better life for our family, but also has wanted to, in a lot of ways, assimilate to American culture. And I think we've done that in a lot of ways, like the dominant language that I speak is English. I don't do very well in speaking my parents' native tongue, even though I can understand it very well because that's the language they used to yell at me when I was younger. But I think it's just been heartbreaking in many ways because I see so many just immigrants in general working so hard to succeed in this country and make it better. And when something like this comes along, all of a sudden, I feel like it's back to square one where we're still trying to fight for our place here. In a lot of ways, when so many of our families have been here for generations. And I think this pandemic has, in a lot of ways, highlighted the fact that although it seems like Asian Americans seem to be one of the demographics that generally don't come under fire in the media, this pandemic has made it clear that in a lot of circles, we're still not seen as fully American. So for me, as someone, who's been raised here and who identifies as American, still seeing that, just so much rampant hate and xenophobia against the Asian American community has just been really hard to get through. But I think it would be harder to get through if I didn't believe in the redeeming power of Jesus Christ and what he's done for the cross and, the hope of what is to come. I think, so April, I'm glad you highlighted that because I think that's definitely been such a key thing to remember, especially when dealing with things like a pandemic, because we're in week, I don't know, of quarantine. And, it just helps to know that there's going to be an end to this suffering. And just know that this isn't something that's going to last forever. So I think in a lot of ways, I'm hopeful because we've just seen a highlight of the work there is to be done in terms of racial reconciliation and all of the things that come with that. But that doesn't mean there aren't painful days when it feels like you don't see there's an end. So holding those things and balancing and making sure you're holding both of those with intentionality has been really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Brooke, what about you?
I think one area of pain, although very minute with compared to Mickaela and April's responses, is just being able to physically be present with another person. I think that's one area that we've definitely taken for granted. I've been speaking to a lot of my cohorts at LMU and, going to school at times, you don't want to go, but now having to hold classes online, we're almost complaining about not being able to be physically present in class. And I think that there's a philosophical aspect to that, in that there's a shared experience between people being able to be physically present, and that can be a blessing, that experience together. But I think, again, it's just encouraging, and it's good to know that we are given the tools to be able to still share experiences virtually. But yeah, like I said, I think it's a little bit more minute compared to April and Mickaela's response.
It's still pain. It's still pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing, is that we all share in each other's pain. As we were talking about earlier, we're all connected. And yeah, just seeing the realities of suffering and pain is that it is felt on an individual level, but it's very much a collective experience right now.
Very much so.
Yeah. So in all this time, there's obviously more time to process things. And I find myself introspecting a lot and taking stock in where I place my values and how beneficial those things that I care about are. So what are some priorities in your life worth keeping and non-essentials you're ready to do away with?
I think this time has definitely highlighted a need for relationships. I think how April kind of alluded to the fact that people have been reaching out to her. I think this is a great time to kind of look inward and see the places in which maybe, or the relationships that may need more care, or the relationships that need to be restored. And I know for myself that this has highlighted, a group of people in my life who maybe it's my time to reach out to. And I don't think it takes the Lord by surprise that we're all at home, but that I think for the Lord, relationships are huge, right? Like his relationship with us, he never turned his face away from us, regardless of the situation. And so I think this is just a great time to kind of lean on that and to kind of walk in that posture.
That was a really good answer. I think I agree with you. Like relationships for sure. Like I want to prioritize relationships. I think a verse that has been in my heart, like has been kind of standing out to me for a while and on my heart, like I've been meditating on, is like, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And I think that it has really resonated with me because like to experience, like I know everyone, like there are many people, but I like personally experienced like a personal crisis in the midst of a global crisis. And it was just like a lot for me. And I feel like that kind of brought clarity in my mind where I was like, I do want I crave like a more simple and slow life. Like I do want to learn like this art of gentleness, of being gentle to myself and having space and margin in my day, in my schedule to extend gentleness to others too. And so it's like, yeah, so I'm still wondering, like, what does it mean to enjoy life, enjoy my relationships, and do so in a way that, like, previously my ambitions may have like run over that aspect.
I love that, April. I was in a Bible study last week, and there was a verse that they alluded to where it says that the Lord comforts us so we can comfort others. And I think that kind of like that kind of aligns with what you're talking about, just being able to like give ourselves that room to be kind to ourselves so that we can extend that kindness to others. So I think that's huge.
Thanks.
Yeah, April, or going off what both you and Brooke have said, I think for me, something that I see as like non-essential that was essential to me in my life has been checking things off on my to-do list, which, could be like 10 to 20 things long on a given day. I think something that, like, obviously this has caused a lot of things to slow down, this current pandemic. So just daily life, the economy, all of those aspects that were markers of productivity in current culture. And I look back to the example of Jesus as he was taking time in to just be in relationship with those he loved. He was never in a hurry. And I think this has really highlighted this idea of not have that that depth is better than width, if that makes sense. So that we have deeper relationships, that we go into things deeper rather than doing a wide gamut of things without really breaking the surface. And I think for me, that has really caused me to take pause and take stock of the priorities I have in life. Because I think as someone who wants to do a lot of things and is has been running at that capacity for a long time, this has highlighted that I'm actually feeling a little burnt out, and I need to slow down and take stock of what's really important. So I think that just this idea of not being in a hurry has just been really important in terms of practicing, because ultimately that's what's going to make us better people, is when we take stock and are really intentional about doing things, not just letting things happen, which I think was, the norm in pre-pandemic life.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about empathy, and I think it's often an outward-facing trait, but it's clear from all of your responses that there's an internal response as well. So how does being empathetic towards yourself, being gentle towards yourself, in turn, help you to approach the world and approach other people with more empathy?
Well, I think for myself, I've really been focusing on the verse where it says that, well, it's a command, right? We're to love the Lord our God, right? But then we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so how can you love others if you don't love yourself? And I think the degree to which you love yourself is how you would love others. And in that, I think there is a beauty in knowing that you are a child of the King. And it's easy to say that, but it's another to understand its magnitude and to understand the promises that the Lord has promised for your life. And maybe that's going a little bit away from that kindness of how you view yourself. But I think just being able to know that you're a child of the King and that you should hold your head high, and that you should love yourself with all the imperfections, that make us human. But I think once you understand that about yourself, able to extend that to others.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Yeah. And also like knowing Jesus as empathetic, like knowing that he is empathetic, and then having that revelation and giving yourself permission to be empathetic to yourself, and then that transforms our relationships and interactions. Yeah.
So something that one of my mentors said to me, back when I was still trying to figure out like what I wanted to do with my life. I still don't know, but like I'm getting there. So I tend to be really self-critical, and I tend to set really high standards for myself, and because of that, I wasn't speaking kindly to myself. And I think that thought pattern, I think, has creeped back in, because I used to spend a lot of time in community, and now have a lot of time for introspection, which, has been both good and bad. So something he said to me when I was having one of those short periods of self-criticism that wasn't necessarily founded on any truth. He said, "Would you speak to your best friend the way you speak to yourself right now?" And I thought that was huge, because my immediate thought was that I would never do that. So I think, like, just April, your emphasis on gentleness, like that's an aspect of self-care that should be directed towards ourselves. That's really important. And I think as Christians, I feel like obviously a lot of us are inclined to be empathetic towards others, but that isn't necessarily extended to us, to ourselves specifically. So I think just going back to scripture too, one of my life verses is 2 Corinthians 12:9, where it says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." I think right now the world is feeling weak, and this is such a critical time for us as Christians to be extending the grace that has been extended to us to other people and to ourselves. And that part of to ourselves, I think, has been largely left out of the conversation, because there's obviously a balance between self-care and, I guess, narcissism. But in a time like right now, I think that also needs to be tempered with the fact that we are in a pandemic. It's a crisis situation for so many of us. And we cannot pour out into others if we are not being poured into ourselves. So yeah, for me right now, that looks like not spending 5 hours watching The Office on Netflix. It looks like taking a step back, taking a walk, reading a book from the multiple books that I have on my list. So I think it's a lot of those little things that we can do. It doesn't have to be, like a full like self-care like spa day. It can be little things like saying no to a commitment that isn't necessarily needed. So there's just a lot of different ways to practice self-care that doesn't have to look like a grand gesture. It's baby steps.
Yeah, all said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all those smaller things that we do are rooted in this bigger understanding that the world doesn't depend on us. And really, like putting that trust in God as sovereign has been something that I've been working through, of like waking up every day and being like, I don't know what's coming next, but I do know that God is in control. And so that frees me to then, care for other people and take it slow on myself. And if I'm not as productive, coming to the end of the day and saying, you know what, it is what it is. Like, I'll come back the next day, and just knowing that like the world truly does not depend on me. Yeah. So something else that we've been talking about in this series is co-creation, and that's roughly synonymous with God's command to be fruitful. So kind of zooming back from our personal experience, what do you all think it looks like for our generation as a whole to be fruitful? And then how do you as an individual hope to be a part of that? April, if you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is, like, first of all, like the fruit of the Spirit, and that actually being the most important part of being fruitful. Like, okay, hopefully I won't miss one out, but like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. I think that's all. But yeah, I think that's like the most important part I see of like being fruitful. Like it starts with being transformed in those. And it is like a more, like, I want to jump into grand visions of how our generation can be fruitful, but it does start with like the everyday decisions, everyday choices, to choose like the fruits of the Spirit, and to practice them. So that's what immediately comes to mind.
When talking about co-creation, I know for myself, the fruits of the Spirit also came up, but I don't know if you were also alluding to the beauty or the emphasis on like the sexual nature of humans. I don't know if that's what your question was also alluding to.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it briefly, but can you tell us more about what it's like to be a Christian in the bioethics field, and what fruitfulness looks like for you specifically in that intersection?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest conversations right now that's being had within the bioethics community is taking away religion from healthcare. And one of the arguments to that is that bioethics is based on 4 principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And a lot of people believe that when you add religion to that, it skews how, or it doesn't allow for those principles to almost be like a checklist, because now you're adding different dimensions into that checklist. And for myself, I believe that any person's religion should definitely be taken into account, because that's what makes us human. If we were robots and we didn't have a sense of identity and we didn't have things that made us different, then that would be okay. But I think religion is an element that kind of helps make us different. But then when you come to this conversation with a Christian mindset, kind of going back to this role of empathy, I think that is what the Lord calls us to be, or to have, like this posture of empathy, this posture of grace and love. And I think in a lot of hard conversations within healthcare, that posture isn't that loving, empathetic posture. It's not there. It's very, very objective. It's very professional. I come in, I ask you how, what's going on, and I leave. There is no relational aspect or at least that relational aspect is being removed. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But bioethics, it's a lot of hard questions, and it has a lot of theological, philosophical aspects to it that definitely allow for some hard conversations, and good ones at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I admire your courage to step into those spaces. Yeah, and to advocate for grace and love, because I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like, you can come at any topic from an objective professional point of view, but we're serving people, and people are
right.
Loving people is the end goal.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
If I could jump in. Oh,
yeah. Absolutely.
Brooke, I love that so much of what you said can be applied to the practice of Christians participating in government as well. So you specifically were talking about having this posture of grace and love. And I know that there's been a lot of talks, I think, in more recent years of taking religion out of politics. As people increasingly become more polarized, and it seems like left and right just don't want to work together. And there's been a lot of anger, specifically, I think, from our generation towards the evangelical conservative white right.
Right.
And I think we're seeing this need for conversation and respectful dialogue that we're not necessarily seeing in a lot of the political forums today. So I was having a conversation with one of my professors, and I was telling him, like, so I'm a pretty avid Twitter user at Mickaela Ramos, and I was saying, like, it's funny to me that you're seeing a lot of these politicians, sending digital jabs to each other on Twitter, which our president seems to be his main forum for sharing policy and opinion with the public. And right. I'm frustrated because there's only so much nuance you can say in 280 characters. And also, isn't there like a building or some sort in Washington, D.C. where you guys can talk about these things? Like, I don't know, Capitol Hill. But, all that to say, I think somewhere that specifically our generation can be more fruitful, and specifically our generation in the church, is political engagement that's thoughtful and nuanced, balancing these ideas of biblical justice and racial reconciliation, and addressing systemic injustice, while also dealing with the realities of current life today, like income inequality and poverty, and all of these things that affect the way people live life. And I think that art has just been lost in the recent years as people, I think social media has been both a double-edged sword in addressing how people communicate with each other. As it has expanded communication, I think it has also served to put people in ideological trenches where, if you can pick and choose the kind of media you consume, you don't necessarily get the full gamut of what people are thinking and how people who are different than you think. And I think we as Christians have a really unique role to play in reaching out to those, on the other side of the political spectrum, regardless of whether you're right or left. But also as people who want to see reconciliation on many different levels. So not just political, but racial, socioeconomical, and all of those things that tend to separate us in society. So I think we have a really unique role to bridge that ideological and political gap. And I hope to see us rise to that occasion. But for me personally, I don't know what that's going to look like. all that to say, just please vote. It's the 2020 election.
I love that you said that, though, because I think that Christians or the church as a whole, we have assumed this posture of judgment. I did a research paper on how religion plays a huge role in abortion, and there was a study that looked at a group of women, and almost 75% felt that they were being condemned for their choices. And I guess going back to that like posture, who are we to judge? I mean, like the Lord has individual relationships with everyone, and I don't think it is our job to just because we don't have the same lens that somebody else has to come in and condemn somebody else. And I think even just in how that plays a role in government and in politics, just because I don't have the same understanding or opinions or thoughts as you doesn't mean that I have to have a negative, angry, demeaning posture. I think just being able to understand a different perspective and appreciate it, I think that's the posture that the Lord wants us to have. Just being able to just sit with somebody and try to understand or just hear them out. Because I think, that's what the Lord does with us. I'm sure our thoughts don't align with his thoughts all the time, but he sure does listen to us and he hears us. In fact, he asks us to be in communication with him all the time. And so if we have that anger, negative posture, then nobody's going to want to sit with us. Nobody's going to want to be in communication with us. And if our job as Christians is to make disciples, well, then we have to be approachable. So, yeah, I love what you said, Mickaela. Loved it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think I've heard all of you talk about sort of the ways that we're seeing the gaps and the needs that aren't being met by our current society that were revealed during the coronavirus pandemic. And there's a lot of talk just in the general discourse about post-COVID life, about not returning to normal and everything being different. So what of our normal do you identify that doesn't fit? And what would it take to see that change after the pandemic is over?
Kayla kind of a little bit earlier, just this need and desire to be on go 24/7. I think that, having to sit and just be still. And I think the Lord or the Bible talks about being still so many times. And it's easy to read over that and to say, yeah, I'm just going to be still. But I think the Lord is really making us sit. And I think it's no surprise, like Mickaela said, that, we're used to having checklists and, on go all the time. But I think one area that I will see in my life, or one area that won't fit in my life moving forward, is just this desire to be constantly busy. I think there's beauty in just being able to sit, especially just sitting in the presence of the Lord and just being still and being quiet, and listening for the voice of God. So that's one area that I'm definitely going to move forward or bring forward in the future.
Yeah, I think for me, something, and I totally agree with you, Brooke. I think something that I'm not going to miss, I think just in like the general, I guess specifically American society, is this like desire for, or this aspect of American individualism. And like, I think to speak a little more about what I mean by that, I think it's just this idea that like, if I'm okay, then I don't need to worry about anyone else. And I think there's, and not to say that American individualism is inherently selfish. I think it can turn into that. Like going back to what I said, especially like, you're seeing people refusing to wear a mask when they're outside, and that small act of whether or not you do it, that can speak to how you view and value the people around you, your community. I think that because a lot of public health does depend on each other, I hope that this current situation has highlighted how much we need to be looking out for each other, not just in terms of public health, but the economy, that, the government and the economy should be working for the betterment of us all, not just the wealthy few. And I hope that one of the lessons we take from this is this idea that each person matters, and regardless of how wealthy they are or what they can contribute to society. I think as Christians, we need to view each other as all being made in the image of God, and that comes with it inherent dignity and rights. Mm-hmm. So I hope that, moving forward, we see that message being spread, not just in Christian circles, but as something that doesn't have to be taught, that it's something that's just known. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. I think for me, like the pandemic I did have a recent transition. So I transitioned to join Ideos as an External Affairs Fellow. And I think that was part of like what I wanted to change. Like, I think that, for years, like I championed this cause of gentleness, but I think this pandemic opened my eyes to how there was still more to that picture, and it could be expanded, like gentleness in the areas of reconciliation, in the areas of peacemaking, and not necessarily just what I was focusing on, which was like being gentle with ourselves and just showing kindness to others. And even though that's a worthy cause in itself, I think like this pandemic just opened my eyes to how like this cause of empathy and reconciliation with gentleness is one that I want to move forward with and be the change in as well. And so I think that was like a personal kind of life switch and transition that I went through because of the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all really great answers. So what are some specific things that that we can change, or that you individually want to be a part of changing, so that we can have this more holistic, more trying to think of a good word for it, more people-centered, I guess, society that isn't just trying to run people out for like the most economic value that they can exchange, but actually is seeking for the flourishing of society.
I think for myself, just exuding the posture of grace and empathy and gentleness and kindness, all of them. I think people tend to flock to those who are, that they exude just this niceness about them. And I think a lot of times, especially for non-believers, they wonder like, what is it about them that makes them the way they are? And I think if you don't have a certain posture, then non-believers won't ask those questions, or they won't feel the love that the Lord wants to that the Lord wants to show those. I just want to be a vessel, and I think just having that posture, I think that's the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me specifically, I want to get more Christians involved in political engagement. So I think I feel like there's this sense, I don't know if you guys can like speak to this as well, but I think in the Christian spaces that I grew up in, there was this sense that Christians don't engage in politics because we're looking for, because God is our king, and all that is true, absolutely. But we're also called to engage in the world around us as well. And right now, I think you're seeing this need to focus on several aspects of government that speak to public health specifically and international security. And I think Christians feel like they can't necessarily engage in those spaces. And I would argue that isn't true, that it's our specific perspective on what morality and justice are, as it is spoken of in the Bible, that it uniquely equips us to engage those spaces in a way that is pleasing to the Father's eye and to bring glory for his kingdom. And that's not to say that government is going to save us all. I obviously don't think that as a Christian, but that doesn't mean we can't try, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't participate in it. Obviously, world peace is going to come when Jesus comes again. But right now, as it stands, we need to look to our governing authorities for guidance. And living in a democracy, we can vote, on policies that that are going to culminate in justice, and seeing that come to fruition, I think is really important. So yeah, I think that's something that I would want to start doing, especially like I said, this is an election year. So what do we want the next 4 years after this to look like? And I think the pandemic is really going to get people thinking of the kind of country they want to see America being. So whether or not we want to change paths or continue on the path that we're on is a question that many of us are going to be answering at the voting booths. And I don't think our faith should be an excuse not to engage the power that has been given to us through voting.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a powerful perspective. April, what about you?
I think using technology in a way that is redemptive, and using technology, social media, to have these kinds of conversations. I've seen a lot of just a lot of ways that social media has been twisted, and how people have been very attacking of other people, especially during now, in the midst of a lot of perspectives, in the midst of a lot of conversations, and a lot of just people carelessly putting out their opinions on social media. I've just seen a lot of different types of bashing. Not that it wasn't there before, but I feel because we have more time to be online, it's just more evident to me right now. So I think I'm just imagining, and I'm believing for and envisioning how we can, as Christians, use technology, use social media to kind of not only fight for the causes that we believe in, use our voices to have conversations that are worthy having, and also even being more careful with how we type our words and what words we use, and and what types of what types of language we're using online as well. I think it is really easy because it's you're just typing, but I feel there's still it still matters. When people read the text that we put out on social media, it still does something to our emotions, and it does shape our minds. So just being more careful, more intentional, more imaginative of how we engage in conversation, how we use social media technology, especially now, our sense of community is kind of shifting to the online sphere.
Yeah, that's absolutely so important that when we aren't face to face, the stories that we're putting out, even more than they normally do, matter, and they say something about our faith and ourselves, and they have an impact on people. Well, we're just about out of time, so thank you all for coming here, for giving your time and sharing your perspectives. This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. All right, you guys have a good day.
You as well. Bye, guys.
Bye. I want to extend my thanks to this week's guests, Brooke Vines, Mickaela Ramos, and April Chen. These women inspire me to step out into the unknown world that's ahead with gentleness and grace, but also with determination to create the better world we all want to see. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you'll join us next week. For more of the Empathy Table, head to the Ideos YouTube account or website and stream audio from any podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, like, subscribe, and share. Follow Ideos on social media to stay up to date with new episodes. Thank you for sharing our table today. We hope you'll tune in next week for another feast of story, hope, and empathy.